Ukraine and Russia are some of the world's biggest food exporters. Together, they're responsible for nearly a third of the world's wheat, from which things like flour is made. And they're also responsible for almost 20% of the world's corn production, and over half of the world's sunflower oil. In total, 12% of the world's calories comes from Ukraine or Russia. But that's where the biggest problem comes in. You see, countries like the US and Canada are pretty self-sufficient when it comes to food production. We all have our own corn and wheat farms, so we don't really need to import stuff from Ukraine or Russia. And Europe? Well, most European countries are wealthy enough to manage an increase in food prices. For most of us, a loaf of bread going from $2 to $2.40 isn't really a big deal. But for countries like Ethiopia, where most people are only earning $35 to $40 a month, a 20 to 30% price increase is a nightmare. And most of Ukraine's and Russia's food exports used to go to regions like these in the Middle East and Africa. These countries' governments would make deals with Russia and Ukraine to subsidize food or take loans out to keep their people fed. It wasn't an ideal situation, but at least they weren't starving. But then the war came along. And suddenly, all of that flew out the window. Russia invades Ukraine, the world sanctions Russia, and all that wheat and corn they were exporting before, yeah, that stuff is not going anywhere anymore. But here's the real kicker. Russia is also a major exporter of fertilizer, so even if countries wanted to avoid starvation by planting their own food, there's now a shortage of fertilizer too, leading to fertilizer also skyrocketing in price. One farmer in Kenya has pretty much given up on farming entirely. For years, she had been growing vegetables to keep her family alive and to make money on the side. But now with all the sanctions blocking Russia from exporting fertilizer, it would cost 5 times more to fertilize her entire farm than before. Even if she could find fertilizer to buy, she would be losing money instead of making it. In this sense, Russian sanctions have backfired dramatically. Now let's talk about Ukraine.
This is the time for farmers to be out there planting corn.
Right now.
Right now. This is the time. And they're not. Why? Because farmers are soldiers.
First, it's kind of hard to focus on keeping farmers happy with their jobs when your country is at war. So obviously, food production in Ukraine isn't anywhere near where it was before the war.
Do you think that people understand how important Ukraine is for feeding the world?
Now they do understand, he says. They may not have before, but now they get it.
The same thing goes for exports. Since most of Ukraine's food is shipped through the Black Sea, which currently is a conflict zone, most of the ships are stuck at port with nowhere to go.
Odessa's port is closed, which has cut off one of the world's largest exporters of food. Ukraine, the size of Texas, is number 4 in corn and wheat, number 1 in sunflower oil. David Beasley told us half the wheat the World Food Program needs worldwide is stuck in Ukraine.
And things aren't getting better anytime soon. Almost every country around the world is worried about running out of food. Even with half a year's reserves, there's no guarantee that the war won't go on much longer than that, leaving millions of people at risk of starvation. Even in America, food prices are going up. All around the world, countries are trying to hoard food for themselves. But in all this chaos and fear, one country has seen an opportunity before. A chance to expand its reach, power, and influence. A chance to take control of governments and nations without pretending it's only there to help. That country, none other than China.
China. It's always China. Bet your ass it's China. Here we go.
China is a complete outlier. For years, China has been stockpiling food. And at this point, China has 150% of their annual consumption of food in storage.
While everyone else was occupied with the prices of the day, China had been secretly creating massive stockpiles of food for years. Right now, if the world stopped producing any food, China could survive for 1.5 years on the food they have in storage. And yet, the US only has enough reserves for not even half of a year, with a population 4 times smaller than China. And when the war in Ukraine hits, China didn't slow down its food collection. They bought up half of the world's grains like wheat, which means they're also responsible for pushing up food prices for everyone else. That means China is in the perfect position for some food diplomacy. For For years, the global power dynamic has maintained a very sensitive balance between the world's superpowers. Every chance they got, China, Russia, and America would try to tip the balance in their favor, and the war in Ukraine was no exception. You see, for decades, many African, South American, and South Asian countries have struggled to keep their people fed, educated, and healthy without outside help. Most of these countries are rich in natural resources, like gold, oil, and other metals, but they don't really have the money or infrastructure to mine or process any of these resources. So they agreed to trade with countries like Russia, China, and the US. You give us money, food security, and medical equipment, and your companies get to come in and mine for gold or oil. Or maybe even choose our next president if you're lucky. But here's the problem. America has almost always had the upper hand when it comes to these trades. No matter how much money China and Russia throw at these countries, America's influence has always had the upper hand, until it comes to food. You see, without food, these African, Asian, and South American countries are at risk of chaos. Everyone knows what happens when people can't buy food, or it's too expensive to afford. So when the time inevitably comes, China will probably come in and offer them something no other country can: food. America only has enough food reserves to keep itself going, but China has enough to use as leverage against all the countries it's interested in. The deal? You let us take your natural resources, you let us influence your government, you be pro-China and anti-West, and in exchange, we'll give you all the food you need. No protests, no revolutions over the people not having enough to eat. You get to keep your money, your power, your position, and we get to suck your country dry. Thanks to the war in Ukraine, China has been given the opportunity of a lifetime to shift the balance of power in some of the most resource-rich countries in the world.
What's up, guys? Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you're new here, my name is Jake,
Crazy.